What I'm going to do right now before we get started is just show our usual antitrust policy notice and so on. So the full antitrust policies on the Linux Foundation website. And if you've got any questions and you're from an LF member company, you can reach out to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Our agenda is pretty simple today. We have news, we work on our standards a bit, then we've got a space for any other business if there's something you want to say, and then we'll close the meeting. Now, as it happens, we have a lot of news. First of all, exciting news. Our security standard has passed the ISO ballot. And we had a nice majority in favor of the standard. We've had some editorial comments that we're currently addressing, and we expect our security standard to be a formal ISO standard within around 30 days. That should end up being ISO IEC 18974:2023. Conformance is already live. And of course, we have companies who have already adopted it while it's a de facto industry standard. And if people have adopted this as a de facto standard, OpenChain Security Assurance 1.0, 1.1, or during the draft international standard phase as ISO IEC DIS 18974, all of that is valid for the forthcoming ISO standard. So if you conform to any of the security specification releases before, then you meet the ISO requirements. This is rather nice news. And, I'm looking forward to us having that second ISO number formally. We will make a big deal about this once we actually have the ISO publication. And this is a milestone. This marks the formal final transition of this project from the project that made the open source compliance standard into the project that is making standards for the trustable supply chain. So we've always wanted to make a trusted supply chain. We focused on compliance first, and now formally speaking, we're building a family of standards. We have 2 ISO standards in play. Nice work, everyone. Very cool. The conformance checklists, there's new and improved online conformance checklists for our license compliance as well as security assurance standards. So basically, it's easier than ever for people to adopt our standards or to send their suppliers to do so. Now, for those of you who follow our calls, our community of conformance is pretty big. By the way, Mary's just sent a note she has to drop and sends congratulations on the ballot. Take care, Mary. We've got a lot of companies using our standards across the world. One of the interesting things is that a lot of companies, a small portion of total adopters, but a lot of companies come to us and say, hey, can you put our logo on your website, show people that we're using the standard? The 100th company to do that is Xfusion in China, and they asked to be put on our website at the end of June. Just recently, a couple of days ago, Lion Corporation, which is one of the major messaging and social networking systems over here in Asia, announced an ISO IEC 5230 compliance program as well. For those of you who are old hands at this project, you'll know that the total figures, we've got some insight. For instance, when PwC did a survey a couple of years ago, they found that 20% of the German companies sampled were already using our ISO standard for compliance. So when we have companies come to us and say, oh, add our logo, it's a very nice and very useful tool for us to encourage adoption, but a small snapshot of the total. Now, on practical side, our legal work group has been busy drafting model provisions to help legal teams use our ISO standards in procurement discussions, procurement contracts, and so on. They're drafting model provisions, which is the type of model language that can be used for inclusion in your negotiations. There's a draft material. It's already published to GitHub, and the conversations are ongoing about once a month on improving the material. But we already have plenty of material to help guide people through using our standards in their procurement negotiation and contract and so on. Our material is reference material. It's not intended to be prescriptive, but it is intended to help your legal teams do stuff better. Meanwhile, our export control work group has been busy too. They're looking at older resources, talking about open source and export control, a fantastic website covering many countries' export control rules was left unmaintained for about a decade. So the volunteers at the export control work group have been talking to the original author, moving the stuff from old HTML website format into Markdown, and looking at how we can set up a review process to make sure the data is still accurate, or at least accurate enough as a reference basis. None of this is intended to be canonical, but it is intended to be potentially useful. We had a nice mini summit at Open Source Summit North America, and all of the recordings are live. So we've got a speech, for example, from Helio on the state of tooling. We've got a nice introduction and demo from LG regarding FOSLite, open source tooling for open source compliance. And of course, we have me yattering on with the keynote. You can skip that bit and listen to the good talks instead. Finally, we had an automotive work group meeting recently, and it was a major meeting with significant and great presentations from Volvo and Hyundai. We will have another automotive work group meeting in August. It'll be announced shortly for end of August. And that's, I think, one of the examples of a heavy industrial area where there's a lot going on, a lot of complexity, tens of thousands of suppliers, and some really good information to share. But for us, this call is all about editing standards. We're editing the future second generation of the security standard and the future third generation of the licensing standard. So we're editing the future, not the current ISO standards. These updates will be put before the board when we're ready. We expect to finish our editing process in around 6 months for the end of this year. On the last call, we focused on the security specification, and the call was about aligning with what we'd already done in the licensing spec draft. So basically, we'd done some stuff in the future licensing spec draft, and we wanted to align the security spec with that. As sister standards, we want to make sure that things like definitions are always going to match. So we were aligning the general terms and definitions, and specifically the SBOM definition between security and licensing. However, rather than simply copying exactly what was in the future licensing draft, the security editors had some comments, and basically we did alignment between security and licensing, but had suggestions for improvement. And that's what we're going to have to look at today. There are 2 items for us to look at. Now, in case you don't have the slides, which I sent to the mailing list earlier, I have just posted this slide, effectively what we're doing today, into the chat. I will also post where the draft versions of both standards are. Okay, so this is the next thing going into the chat. These are the draft versions of the future standards. We're going to be focusing on the licensing one today. Now, the first item, GitHub issue 30 from Security Assurance Spec, is that there was a clarity suggestion from Singing, and that is one of our contributors from Taiwan. I want to show you what she suggested. I think it's a pretty simple suggestion. I'm going to share my screen to show that to you now. Okay. On our existing terms and definitions, we have something that comes from IETF. And it says that certain keywords should be interpreted in certain ways. And then it has words like must not, should not, and may, and says how they should be interpreted. Singing had a suggestion. She just suggests that we put quotation marks around these words to make it easier to read and similar to the first sentence. So the first sentence talks about various words and puts quotation marks on them. But on the descriptors, there's no quotation marks. So she suggests we just add the quotation mark here to must not, should not, and may.
Sounds like a brilliant suggestion.
Right? It seems like an easy win, right?
That's right.
And she came at it as a non-native speaker. She just said that it would make it easier to read for her. And yeah, I don't see any controversy on that. Does anyone else have an opinion?
But either way is okay, but we should have some kind of standard. You can see that required shall is under with commas and must, yes. So you can look for that in every single thing should be follow the same pattern. Otherwise, it sounds weird.
Yep.
So either way, with or without, it doesn't make difference that much. So for example, the key looking on the has the phrase here, not recommended. That is not up in the keywords. You have only a recommended there. So see, we need to check which ones that you're talking about and which ones are available there.
Yep.
Well, let's see. Should not, or the phrase not recommended. So those two things are lumped together in the same paragraph, just like it is up here with should. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so what you're recommending is those should be separated out?
Yes, true. And actually not recommended on should be mentioned on the keywords. It's not mentioned there too.
So we might fix it by adding not recommended up here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Good call.
That's a weird oversight by IETF, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'm surprised.
Yeah, me too.
Come on, developers, we pass the whole day revising code. We know these things very well about.
Sebastian's hand is up. Sebastian, what's on your mind?
Thank you. Well, what's on my mind is in just over 2 weeks' time, it's going to be IETF 117. And so if any OpenChain people will be there in San Francisco, I think it is, for the 117, then maybe they can get through a fast-track update to this standard, and then there won't be a misalignment between OpenChain and the IETF on this.
Absolutely, good point. And I mean, at the very least, if we do an adjustment on clarity, we should definitely send that into IETF, even if no one's at the event, to make sure that they have these notes from us.
Yeah, I have a friend who's going to IETF 117, but I'm not myself. So, if he's got any spare minutes left in the busy schedule, then maybe you can put some words around.
Absolutely.
Wow. I mean, it shouldn't take. It shouldn't take too long to correct this, because it looks to me like this is an obvious oversight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to add here singing comments included on quotation marks, and Helio also caught that not recommended was missing keywords used in the full text. Fixed both for us and will submit back to IETF.
Cool.
Yep.
Good work, everybody.
Yeah, we're fixing other people's standards.
I love it.
Trouble on the horizon. They're gonna love it too. Okay, so this looks like a really simple win for us. And now I'm doing this on the licensing, the security spec document. But I just want to check. I mean, the actual proposal is that we align security and licensing with exactly this language. Does anyone have any objection to us doing that alignment?
Not I.
Agreed.
I don't know what working group would be doing that nowadays, because it was last updated in 2017.
Oh. So it was a while back.
Yeah, so that working group may have been disbanded by now, if it was ever a group in the first place.
Okay, well, we'll make sure to get into their hands what we've been up to. And, you know, I'm sure that various people in our orbits might lend a hand. Now, there's a second thing here. Yeah. Ninjoji-san from Toshiba said that we may want to check for conflicts between ISO and IETF language. So we're currently looking at IETF language. And the reason we're looking at IETF language is because that's what our telco work group used as the basis for their spec. However, we may need to do further adjustment because, yes, ISO has their own definitions. So we need to check about the ISO and IETF definitions to see if they conflict, not least because we're making ISO standards. So if there's a goof between the IETF and ISO definitions, we will need to probably go back and check that. Now, I have not, at this juncture, had a chance to look at the ISO versus IETF language conflicts or non-conflicts. My suggestion is we put this as a to-do for the next call. Unless people want to literally do it now, which is also fine.
Do we have time to do it now?
Yeah, we can do it now. Sure.
Why not?
Okie dokie. All right, so I'm just going to open the... this is where the disaster happens and I just lose everything. Give me a second. All right. What could possibly...
Shane, do you remember something called revision control?
Yeah, I'm a genius. No, I haven't touched any of the documents yet. This is all just open on the issue right now. The problem or not problem with ISO is that it looks like they have fewer items described quite differently. Okay, I'm gonna try split these out, play with Mac Magic, put them side by side. Okay, so I just need a new second to see if
Then I recommend you to install a program called Hectangle in your Mac. You can do this magic everywhere then.
that will be good. Okay, I'm going to try and share a portion of my screen. My screen should be sharing now.
Yep.
There. Okay. Right. On the left, we have the IETF definitions. On the right, we have the ISO definitions. So shall, should, may, and can. I'm going to leave it to you as the intrepid team to double check if you think they match or not. Over to you, Helio and Chris.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, I think that's fun. Yeah, that's going to take a little bit of digging there.
Show is equivalent to must. No, actually must doesn't exist.
I think one of the sort of the minefield elements here is that the lowercase in the ISO style guide means that you can, hide one. So I think it might be worth doing some search and replace and such just to see like where they are. I think it's much easier to miss a lowercase shell than a big uppercase in the IETF style.
A good point. So in that case, and this is interesting, the IATF talks about shall, but doesn't actually seem to define it. It just, well, it's an equivalent to must, which is fine. Requirement. Should, recommendation, that's fine. May, yeah, something is
we have the may below too, so
yeah. Can, we're missing can.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, true.
We are.
I think the can isn't necessarily needed though for a standard like OpenChain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that almost falls into the same bailiwick as may. You may do something or you can do it. It's almost interchangeable.
And it's almost a bit presumptuous to say can, because I'm imagining some very dysfunctional organization, which, I mean, one would hope they could send an email, but unfortunately they cannot. So,
yes, that is true.
we do assume.
In that case, it looks like our terms align, but as I think it was Sebastian pointed out, as a side note, we might want to put an action item to go through our spec, a new issue to go through our specs and see if we've got any hidden shall, should, mays. And just double check what we're doing in our spec. But that seems like a completely different issue from what we have right now, which is, as far as I can see, there's no conflict between the IETF and the ISO ones. What do you think?
Oh.
It doesn't look like it, no.
Yeah, I'm still not certain about the whole must part. Because if it exists on IETF means something is different between should and must. And what are their view about this difference? Because in the terms of the...
I think we might be okay, because shall in ISO is the same as must in IETF. And that's the requirement, same. And recommendation, should, recommendation. I think we're okay. It's just that IETF puts must first, where ISO puts shall first.
Yeah, agree.
Now, just as a side note, as we do this stuff, it's possible that our ISO editors will rejig some of this in the final document. What we're doing is doing our internal consistency.
It's always edited anyway.
Yeah. And I mentioned the security spec passed the ISO ballot, and there's just some editorial. So we'll be coming back with a few editorial notes to update our draft from the ISO thing, which is when we will also inherently revisit this. Okay, I'll just make a marker here that we have we also reviewed I need to learn how to type conflicts flagged as Vine and Joji, and no conflicts found. In that case, it looks like we, unless there's an objection, we merge the standards.
I think so. And could you also put that the definitions are originally from the IETF RFC 2119 after reviewing the ISO document or something, just so that everybody that reads it knows that we've looked at both of them?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm just going to put the new language here, and I'll just make sure everyone's happy with it. Okay. So that would be our final language. Final sentence definitions are originally from IETF RFC 2119. We reviewed the ISO definitions to confirm no conflict. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
And that makes it easy for someone to actually come back and say, no, you're wrong. There is a conflict.
And if they think that there is, then we can talk about it. And if there is, we can address it then.
Absolutely. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Meanwhile, Sebastian is suggesting that we do ought, oughtn't, and shouldst. No. Stop it. No more talking, Sebastian. For those of you who aren't from the British Isles, he's just messing around. Don't worry. Okay, so that's actually significant. We've finished the terms and definitions for security and licensing. This comment thread is in the security side. I'll just open an issue on licensing to say that we're fixing as per this thread. Then I'll update both specs and I'll close both issues. Now we have something meaty, which is going to be fun. Going to take a moment to do the next thing. The next thing is that we have a software bill of materials definition, and apologies, the screen sharing is going crazy. There is method to my madness, and it shall be revealed momentarily. Okay. We have a suggestion from the security team that our definition for software bill of materials, which is, and I'm pulling up, on the right is the licensing spec. The suggestion is that the software bill of materials definition used in the licensing spec and in the security spec is changed from the highlighted text of 2.7 into the following text. Now I'm going to go quiet and give people time to read these and then to start to comment on what they think about this. And you know, it's licensing spec, so Helio, I guess you should lead on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are a few things that have, I think it was the last general community call that we discussed this, Shane. It was quite a small attendance. Yes. And it looks as if there have been some modifications since. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the latter half because, you know, SPDX is a proper standard to use. SPDX Lite, I know, is quite popular in the OpenChain community, but I'm not sure it really satisfies the security use cases.
Yeah, that's okay. I will go exactly to say something similar to what Sebastian does. Yeah, we know that we love SPDX. We are side by side with them, but this is the public specification and the parts that we need to say that this bill of materials should be agnostic of format. Yeah. So this is yeah.
I suppose I would slightly differ there in that, as it is at the moment, SPDX is in my personal opinion, SPDX is the only standard at the moment which can do what OpenChain requires. I know some people have different opinions, but in practice that appears to be the case.
Actually, it's not anymore since they did some sneak release of Cyclone DX that mostly provide everything as well too. That's a very curious thing, but the new version of Cyclone DX as well is completely right there.
Okay. I think what we came up with last month, which I don't know any discussion in between then, was mostly like the first two sentences, so inventory for software, etc., and then an example is the SPDX specification, and it doesn't go into, those latter two sentences.
I think it's okay, but in general, okay. This is exemplifying these things is to be okay.
Just some context on the latter two sentences. And I'm just going to copy paste into the chat the full issue thread. The final sentence, regardless of SBOM specification used, it could usefully indicate name, version, origin, license, copyright, and known vulnerabilities. That comes from earlier, before we started messing with the definition, which was the kind of starting point of the original ISO standard of license compliance, just outlining the types of fields that we'd expect. So we had a discussion on the North America Asia call around the 20th of June, which said, well, let's make sure that if people choose a different SBOM spec, they also know the type of basic fields that should usefully be included. So that's where that sentence comes from. The minimal SBOM discussion came from the fact that especially with SPDX3, there was a lot. So licensing, security, but also stuff like AI bombs. So to make clear that different use cases, or if people want to go light, is possible. And the landing on SPDX Lite actually came from the fact that it's an appendices in SPDX generation 2, so appendices 7. So it's a formal ISO standard definition of a minimal SBOM, but forward-looking, and this is, I think, to Sebastian's point, SPDX3, which includes the security profile, also has a new version of SPDX Lite, which has just been submitted from the OpenChain Japan work group. So the thinking there was that SPDX Lite in the SPDX that officially covers security is going to be an official profile intended to capture the core essence of what's needed. So that's the thinking behind all of this. Just a side note before we continue, Karsten said he found the term ingredients irritating, this list of ingredients. It is not entirely elegant, but we were trying to align as closely as possible with the NTIA definitions in the US. And that first sentence is basically exactly what they said. They chose the term list of ingredients. That's just a side note, not saying that it's not irritating, just where it came from.
Yeah, it's very untechnical, belongs in the kitchen, along with SPDX Lite. I've never understood why we would want to use SPDX Lite in generating an SBOM.
Yes, there's reasons, believe me, but it's not in our reasons, unfortunately.
Okay.
There's Max, so you with the hands up.
Yeah, I would just like to add something on SPDX Lite regarding SPDX 3. I think the current proposal for SPDX Lite does not align with how SPDX 3 is expected to look like, and so there's still a lot of work to do. And I think that SPDX 3 is the other way around. It's a minimal subset to which you can add profiles. So I'm not sure if SPDX Lite as a concept works with SPDX 3 or with the current proposal. There just to flag that it might SPDX Lite might not be a term that is as prominent in SPDX 3, or at least the current proposal isn't really sound.
That's a very good point. Sebastian's hand is up as well.
Thank you. I mean, as you can expect, I do have fairly strong opinions on this. I would be much loath to miss out that very special word complete that we discussed in the last meeting, because that to me is a very important part of SBOMs in practice.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear.
Yeah.
In that case, should we perhaps try to be this is a suggestion. I'm just going to mess with this as a suggestion. There are options for different use cases or lightweight lightweight SBOMs. Taking out SPDX Lite here. But regardless of the SBOM used, could.
Shall, must.
Oh, stop it!
Ought to.
And
thou shalt.
I quit. I'm done.
Thanks, Helio.
Is it possible that if we run with language, maybe just like this. We should add a sentence, complete for purpose. Now, complete for purpose is not intended to be the right sentence, but it's just an example. Okay, I'm just pausing there.
I would just like to point out that whether a SBOM should contain a known vulnerabilities or not is also a heated discussion in other rounds.
Correct.
And just to flag that, there are very strong opinions against that, and there are others that so it's a complex topic, at least on its own.
Is it possible then that we might want to
Yeah, this is starting to make better sense.
Yeah.
I also put a sentence in the chat, may replace the last one, because I think it's more simpler, more simplistic.
Okay. If you can put
Because
the adjusted sentence, that would be super great. Chris has his hand up as well. I don't think you're a chair.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. My apologies.
Okay. No, I was just going to say I like the adjusted language better than what was there before. I still have very strong misgivings about using lightweight licensing with your vulnerability, because if people are only looking at one SBOM and they're not pulling all the SBOMs out and looking at them, a complete SBOM, you never really know what the licensing is inside the components. So that's always been my problem with it. If you're going to do a vulnerability software bill of material, great. Do it just against the components and leave the licensing out of it. If you want to know the licensing information, go to the licensing SBOM or the full SBOM. That's kind of my opinion, but I do understand that there are a million opinions out there right now, even about whether you should be using them separately or not. So until the world votes on that, I guess I'm out. But that was just what my thought was.
So I think personally the term profiles would be good here. Yeah, we have it kind of implicitly, or we had it implicitly. So I think I would say there are different SBOM profiles for different use cases. And then we basically open the round to refine those profiles. I think this could be one aspect OpenChain wants to look into. So what is the best profile for vulnerability SBOMs, and what is the best profile for binary distribution SBOMs, or for source SBOMs and the like. Yeah? We have so many representations of software, but we normally do not really differentiate those.
Is it possible that changing the final sentence like this might work?
Really good.
Sebastian, you've got your hand up as well.
Thank you. At the risk of sounding like a scratched record, I think I'd like to explain by analogy what I mean when I stress the importance of completeness. So say if you've got a building which you consider secure, a physical brick and mortar building, and you've got doors with locks, you've got windows with alarms, you've got these features that help secure it, and you have a architect's plan of that. It doesn't help to have a big dark box on one side of the plan saying the architect doesn't know what's here. It could be that, that interior wall is in fact a big gaping hole. It could be a door without a lock. It could be an insecure window. So if you extend that analogy to, say, vulnerability management, if you have an SBOM which contains, say, 10 pieces of software, but the software that you actually, an SBOM that describes 10 pieces of software, but what you send to me on your CD is 12 pieces of software, I have a big reason to, ring the alarm bells to distrust that. Because if I was going to find any vulnerabilities, I can be pretty sure that those two big gaps would be the first place to look. So I could say that it's a partial SBOM that I received, but I don't think it would be in any way truthful to say what I received was an SBOM when it actually doesn't cover the software that I received.
Surely this is why we invented the term ish.
We ought to use that.
I just feel that if you take the analogy of like a physical secure building, you would not tolerate an architect giving you plans which were just like half cut off. You need to see the perimeter bits.
To me, these are quality criteria. So this is
Yeah.
being complete is one out of many. The question is how we represent that.
Exactly. But completeness is one aspect of quality that the NTIA...
Yeah, but then perhaps we should say that there are different quality criteria associated with those profiles, for example.
Yeah, I just pointed out so, you know, so repeatedly, because the NTIA don't value completeness as a quality in the thing.
They even say license information is recommended, no, optional. They say hashes are recommended. This is not a quality profile the NTIA specifies.
Precisely, and yet the NTIA specification, the documents, are what a lot of people look at, and they're just not. They're not sufficient for something like OpenChain. You don't really get any kind of trust. It's more of a sketch than it is an architect's plan.
But for me, it means if I would define an SBOM profile for a certain use case, and this use case has something to do with security, vulnerability, I would of course look into my profile definition to cover those NTIA minimal SBOMs element. That's what I would do. That's basically making sure it's covered, but the NTIA itself is not a really quality profile.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. I think the question then is, where in OpenChain does that definition exist of quality? And is it different? Is it substantially different that you would want to separate them out into the two different specifications that OpenChain publishes?
Yeah, but I personally think that this is one of the next greater things to do, to really define SBOM profiles with quality criteria. But I think at the moment we don't want to do this here. We simply want to define the term, but we could at least open the door in that direction, to say every profile has a different definition of quality, or what is a quality SBOM.
Well,
yeah, that makes sense.
The challenge for us in these two specs is that we've stated that we're going to focus on the what, but not the how. So defining something like use an SBOM, but not how that SBOM should be constructed. So that's the rationale for why we haven't touched on that to this juncture. We focused on the what, not the how. But there is a valid argument that we might want to talk about the what in an SBOM is required to make it useful, and not necessarily talk about how that SBOM should tag itself, blah, blah, blah. So maybe the what could also be exactly what you said, Karsten. Just as a side note, I'm just giving context here. Sorry, Chris, over to you.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah, I agree with Karsten.
So probably as a future improvement suggestion for both of these specs would be to try to work up what is a common quality definition for security and what is a common quality set of criteria profile, if you want to call it that, for the software licensing. But then somewhere you've got to merge the both for organizations that want to provide all of that information in one SBOM, and they don't want to do separate ones.
Yep. So in that case, how about we take this language, just put it in the chat, kind of where we're at right now, and we activate that as the SBOM definition for now. Obviously, these are not finished standards. We can keep editing them. And we open a new issue, which says the must approach, the kind of the stuff that we would need to see in an SBOM for licensing or security, is something that we could usefully expand on either now or in a future version of the spec and open that issue. So we transfer from the basic definition of a software bill of materials, we close that into another discussion of what would be the must for a quality bill of materials. And that does seem to fit in mandate, because our goal is quality licensing or security programs. And obviously, if they have a non-quality SBOM, then the program will fail.
I think we need to be a little careful about that as well, at least here in the US, because of the way our nice folks in Washington are currently mandating things. It's not really clear yet whether they're mandating that we generate and have available, if requested, the vulnerability information, because I think that there are companies that are out there who do not wish to share the vulnerability of information from their complete package with the world. But if a specific customer comes and says, "Tell me about it, because I've buying your software," then we would provide it. So I think there's differences between a complete SBOM from the CISA, the U.S. government regulatory agency that seems to be passing out a lot of guidance as to whether or not it's just the software bill of materials that has the complete set of things for software from a licensing standpoint, and the vulnerability stuff is separate, or whether they're a complete SBOM to their way of thinking is both. And so far, that's not real clear. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Yep, me too.
So if I may be permitted to blow my own trumpet a little here, I did do a talk last year at FOSDEM, the online FOSDEM for 2022. So I'll post a link in the chat for that. And that covered qualities of SBOMs. The title is The Distinctive Qualities of Effective SBOMs.
Nice. I think Sebastian accidentally volunteered to help lead the review of the next issue on this topic.
By all means.
Nice. I'll have to get that and read it.
Shane, almost as good as Jelaine Lovejoy at volunteering people for things.
Yep. Learning from the best. Carson, apologies. You were about to say something, I believe. No? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear you quite. Can you repeat, please?
I think you were about to say something. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was, yes. Actually, we have the task on the desk here to define such profiles. Yeah. It comes out of German administration. I don't know whether you heard of Open Code Repository. They have a strong SPDX relationship and also OpenChain context. And there, the term SBOM stands there in basically the code of conduct. Yeah, you have to produce SBOMs for your software. However, this produce SBOMs for your software is so unspecific that nobody knows what to do. And so we currently have the task, or we have taken the initiative to define particular SBOMs for example, binary distributions, and also NTIAs of relevance. All these aspects are of relevance, and we would try to capture these. However, this SBOM will be basically intended to, in the first case, to identify the software components rather than giving assertions around licenses and vulnerabilities. These come then later and will extend with different profiles. That's at least the initial concept that we follow. And I think it's a general question that we have in focus here right now.
A very good point. Well, what we'll do then is we'll open that new issue to start working on this, which sounds like it might be a big job, but a very important one. But then just to confirm, for this call, oh no, for this call, are we okay to update software bill of materials definition to this existing one, which aligns with NTIA, keeps a reference to an example SBOM, but requires that no matter what specification you use, so we're not prescriptive, it should be a complete profile for the intended use case. Is that okay to lock down?
Proposal in the chat for correcting the last sentence, so it should follow a profile suited for the intended use case.
It should follow a profile. Should we keep the word complete?
Should
To
an appropriate. I mean, does the readership know what profile is? So maybe just
intended use case. That is the rest of the sentence. Then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be all right because of the.
Yeah, I think quality profile would be redundant, but maybe a little safer.
I also just
Thanks,
thought
Max.
about quality profile. I would be fine with it. I think this is what we intend to do. However, I would lower the bar at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Especially because we haven't defined quality yet, but complete is almost self-defining, albeit vague.
And make sure to put that should in capitals.
Okay, fine. But I just know the.
I think that should be a must.
Oh, stop it.
Sorry.
I am changing it back.
Oh, I went too far with that one.
You did. Okay, so we will align with this definition on both and open a new issue. Discuss what is a quality or complete SBOM for different, or I'll just say licensing and security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we don't care about AI.
Right.
You want to make the A at the beginning of the definition capped?
The reason it's not capped is just because the ISO editor says that for every definition, ISO wants it to start with lowercase. I know it's weird.
Oh, okay. That's fine. If that's their rule, we play by it.
All right. In that case, my goodness, we're done. And I think we're out of time, actually. I'm not sure exactly what time it is. I think
1 minute past the hour.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Very good.
Yeah. Any other business?
Oh yeah, I've got to say the new mascots look great. Not those penguins specifically, but the ones you sent on the mailing list.
Oh, the cute ones! My goodness, our Korean community really does know how to do the cute stuff. And more of our material will be available either corporate, no mascots, original penguins, or the super cute new mascots. So our slides and handouts and so on will gradually include more and more.
So what's next?
Yeah.
A 3D model and an animated?
Well, I was thinking NFTs.
Soon we'll get the tie-in anime and the tie-in video game, and the OpenChain merchandise.
All of us will be millionaires thanks to being here on the early days. Well, everyone, thank you for a wonderful meeting, and please have a great day wherever you are.
You do the same. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.